The Arizona sun in late summer 1889 was not a giver of life, but a judgment. It bleached the sky to a pale, hostile white and baked the alkali flatlands until the horizon itself seemed to shimmer and dissolve. Dust, fine as milled flour, coated everything, erasing the line between the earth and the air. At the edge of this scorched expanse stood the Sagebrush Cross, a ranch that had seen better days and was now bracing for worse. Elias Boone, the ranch's solitary owner, worked with a grim, practiced economy of motion. He was a widower, a word that felt too soft for the hard, quiet life he now led. The silence of the place had seeped into him, making his movements deliberate, his voice, when he bothered to use it, rough as unginned cotton. He was fixing the main gate. The top hinge had warped in the relentless heat, its screech a daily offense. He'd spent the morning sanding the post and fitting a new piece of iron. His hammer blows the only punctuation in the vast, empty afternoon. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was flat, eaten immediately by the immense quiet. He set the last rivet, the metal seating firm. He tested the gate. It swung smooth, silent, a small, grim satisfaction. He bent to retrieve his tools, the sweat stinging his eyes, the grime thick on his hands. That was when the silence changed. It was not a sound that broke it, but a shift in the quality of the stillness. The air felt suddenly watched. He straightened slowly, wiping his brow with a forearm. He scanned the shimmering yucca and creosote bushes that marked the approach to his property. Nothing, just the heat devils dancing. Then he saw them. They were impossibly small, standing just past the line of skeletal yucca trees, as if they had materialized from the dust itself. Two girls, children. They looked to be about 4 years old, though hardship could make a child look younger or older than their time. They wore identical, faded cotton dresses, the color washed out to a pale, indeterminate blue. Their feet were bare, caked in white alkali dust. They stood side by side, the taller one holding a faded canvas drawstring bag. Elias did not move. Strays were common, sometimes starving prospectors, sometimes families whose wagons had broken axles, but never children, not alone. They just watched him, their faces obscured by the shadows of their own tangled, sun-streaked hair. He was a big man, broad in the shoulder and made rough by 5 years of solitary grief. And he knew he must look like a desert boogeyman. He took a half-step toward them, keeping his hands visible, away from the hammer. "You lost." His voice was a gravelly thing, startling even himself. The children flinched. The smaller one hid behind the taller, clutching her dress. The taller girl, Hazel, though he did not know her name yet, took a shaky breath. She stared at his face, her gaze intense, searching, and then she spoke, her voice thin as a bird's shadow. Yet it cut through the oppressive heat and the ringing in Elias's ears. "Daddy?" The word was a physical blow. The heavy forge hammer slid from Elias Boone's grip, landing with a muffled thud in the dust. His heart, a thing he'd thought half dead, kicked against his ribs like a panicked horse in a box stall. He could not breathe. He could not think. The world narrowed to the two small figures and the impossible, ruinous word they had spoken. He stared, truly seeing them for the first time. The taller one, Hazel, had a fierce set to her jaw, a way of planting her feet as if daring the ground to move. The smaller one, Wren, peeked out, her eyes wide with a terror that was heartbreakingly familiar. "What did you say?" Elias managed, the words scraping his throat. Hazel stepped forward, her small hand tightening on the bag. She did not repeat the word. Instead, she just looked at him, and he saw, beneath the grime and the fear, the distinct shape of her eyes. They were green, flecked with gold, shaped like almonds. Rosalie's eyes. He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin cold despite the furnace heat. It was a trick of the light, a cruelty of the sun. Rosalie Quinn, his wife, was dead. She had burned with the steamship Agnes May on the Colorado River 5 years prior, 1884. They never even found a body to bury. He had buried an empty pine box and his own future with it. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. The girls recoiled again. This was a mistake. He was frightening them. He knelt, slowly, painfully, forcing his body down onto one knee, bringing himself closer to their level. The dust settled on his jeans. "I won't hurt you," he said, softening his voice, trying to find a tone he hadn't used in half a decade. Who are you?" Hazel's eyes flicked to her sister, then back to him. She seemed to be following an instruction, a carefully rehearsed plan. Her gaze dropped to his chest, then his boots, as if confirming something. Then she reached up to her own neck, around her throat. On a worn leather thong hung a simple brass medallion. Elias's vision tunneled. He knew that medallion. He had hammered it himself from a spent shell casing, filed it smooth, and stamped it with the image of a cypress tree, the one they'd picnicked under on their wedding day. His hand, calloused and shaking, reached out. "May I?" She nodded. A tiny, jerky motion. His thumb, stained with grease and rust, fumbled with the clasp. It was stiff. He pressed the small catch he'd built into the side. It sprang open. Inside, just as he knew it would be, was a single pressed yucca flower, pale and fragile as paper, and beneath it, scratched into the brass, were 2 letters. R.Q. Rosalie Quinn. A roaring filled his ears. He knelt in the dust, the sun beating on his back, staring at the proof of an impossibility. This was a ghost, a waking nightmare. As he knelt, the wind shifted. It was a dry, hot wind, but it carried something new. Not just the scent of dust and sun-baked creosote. It was faint, elusive, the smell of burnt pine, sharp and clean. The memory struck him with the force of a physical impact. Rosalie's voice, laughing, her face bright as she met him on the porch after a long cattle drive. He'd come in smelling of sweat, leather, trail dust, and the pine smoke of his campfire. She had buried her face in his shirt and whispered their private joke. "You have it," she'd say. "The smell of a man who rides like thunder." He looked up from the medallion, his heart pounding a desperate rhythm. The 2 girls were watching him, their expressions unreadable. Then, the smaller one, Wren, stepped out from behind her sister. She looked at Elias, her bottom lip trembling. She raised one small, dusty hand. She touched her chest, over her heart. She touched her forehead, over her thoughts. And then she pointed, her tiny finger aimed directly at Elias Boone. Elias physically recoiled, scrambling back a step as if he'd been struck. It was their signal, a silent promise Rosalie had invented, a thing shared only between the 2 of them in the quiet of the night. "You are in my heart. You are in my mind. I send all my love to you. It could not be." This was not a coincidence. This was not a cruel trick. He looked, truly looked, at their faces. He saw past the grime, the fear, the exhaustion. He saw Rosalie in the sharp, stubborn line of Hazel's jaw. He saw her in the deep, sudden dimples that appeared in Wren's cheeks as she fought back a sob. He saw her, clear as day, in the slight, worried frown that creased the skin between their identical green-gold eyes. This was not a haunting. This was blood. His blood. Her blood. His shaking hands closed the medallion. He turned it over. He had forgotten the other side. There, scratched in Rosalie's hurried, familiar script, was the final piece. If lost, find the smell of home. The smell of home, the scent of burnt pine, the man who rides like thunder. She had sent them to him. She was alive. The implications of that thought were too vast, too terrible to hold. 5 years. 5 years of believing she was ash. 5 years of this empty, hollow life. If she was alive, where had she been? Why send the children now, and who had kept her? The girls were swaying. The weight of the sun, their journey, and his own terrifying presence was too much. Hazel's grip on the canvas bag faltered. Elias Boone stood up. The gate hinge, the dust, the scorched horizon, it all vanished. There was only this. He picked up his hammer, tucked it into his belt. He looked at the 2 children who wore his dead wife's face. "Come inside," he said. The words felt like rust breaking free in his throat. He did not wait for an answer. He turned and walked toward the low, solid adobe ranch house. He heard their small, bare feet scurrying in the dust behind him. Hazel's hand, small and sticky, grabbed a handful of his canvas trousers. Wren clutched the bag. He felt it before he saw it. The prickle on the back of his neck. The animal instinct of being watched by unseen eyes. Halfway to the porch, he stopped. He did not turn his whole body, just his head, scanning the long, distant property line, where the mesquite grew thick and dark against the pale land. The heat haze distorted the world, making everything shimmer, but it could not hide the figure. He was too far away to see a face, but the shape was unmistakable. A man on horseback. He was perfectly still, sitting his horse just inside the shadow of the mesquite grove. He wore a flat-brimmed black hat that hid his features, giving him a headless, ominous silhouette. He was not a neighbor. He was not a lost traveler. He was watching the house, watching the children, watching Elias. A cold that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down Elias's spine. He moved, placing his own large body between the watcher and the children. The rider sat for 1 second longer, a statue of pure malice in the shimmering air. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he turned his horse and vanished back into the distorted landscape, as silently as he had appeared. Elias grabbed the girls, his grip harder than he intended, and hustled them onto the porch. He shoved the heavy door open and pushed them gently inside, into the cool darkness of the house. He slammed the door shut. The heavy thunk of the iron bar sliding into its bracket sounded deafeningly loud in the sudden gloom. He stood with his back to the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Outside, the sun hammered the world. Inside, 2 small, terrified girls stared up at him, and the questions were a storm breaking in his skull. Rosalie Quinn was alive, and someone had just watched him find out. The interior of the ranch house was dark and still, heavy with the scent of wood smoke, old leather, and 5 years of solitude. It was a man's space, utilitarian and stripped of softness. Elias shut the heavy bar across the door, the sound final. The 2 girls, Hazel and Wren, stood frozen on the packed earth floor, clutching each other. Their eyes, huge and green in the gloom, darted from the empty fireplace to the scarred wooden table, to the rifle resting on its pegs by the wall. Elias's hands felt huge and clumsy. He was a man accustomed to breaking horses and mending fences, not handling things so fragile. "You're safe here," he said, his voice too loud in the quiet room. He moved to the hearth. The embers from his morning coffee fire were still alive, a faint red pulse in the gray ash. He stirred them, adding a few sticks of dry mesquite. The wood caught quickly, the flames casting a warm, flickering light that made the shadows dance. He filled the heavy iron kettle from the water barrel and swung it over the fire. The metal began to hiss and tick. "You're covered in trail dust," he said, more to himself than to them. He found a basin, a clean rag, and the block of harsh lye soap he used for everything. He poured water from the kettle, cooling it from the barrel until it was just warm. He knelt before them again, the basin on the floor. Hands first. Hazel, the brave one, thrust hers out. He gently took her small, grime-caked hands and began to wash. The soap stung the raw, cracked skin on her palms, and she winced but made no sound. He washed with an awkward tenderness, scrubbing the alkali dust from beneath her nails. He did the same for Wren, whose hands trembled in his. He wet the rag and wiped their faces. Beneath the mask of dirt, their features sharpened, becoming agonizingly clear. It was Rosalie's face, split in 2. Hazel had her stubborn chin and the intensity of her gaze. Wren had her mouth and the vulnerability in her eyes. He set them at the table, pouring 2 tin cups full of goat's milk, rich and warm. He sliced thick wedges of the cornbread left over from his breakfast. They ate with a desperate, silent speed that spoke of a hunger he hadn't known existed. They did not talk, they just ate, their eyes fixed on the food. While they finished, Elias turned toward the ladder leading to the small sleeping loft. His movements were stiff, as if pulling against a heavy weight. He climbed into the low-ceilinged space where he slept, the air thick with the smell of his bedroll and old cedar. Under his cot, tucked in the back corner, was a small wooden chest. Rosalie's chest. He hadn't opened it since the day he'd returned from the river, the day the world had ended. His fingers hesitated on the latch. Opening it felt like a betrayal, like disturbing a grave. But the grave was empty. He lifted the lid. Inside, on top of a folded paisley shawl, lay two objects. One was a photograph, a silver tintype, already fading. It showed him and Rosalie on their wedding day, standing outside this very house. He looked unnaturally stiff in a borrowed suit. She was radiant, her smile wide, her head tilted just so, her eyes full of a fierce, bright love. He touched the cool metal, his thumb tracing the ghostly image of her face. The other was his old harmonica, a simple tin and wood model. He'd given it to her when they were courting. He could barely play, but she could make it sing. She had one tune she favored above all others, a sweet, melancholic air she called the Copper Creek Waltz. He picked it up. The metal was cold. He held it in his palm, the weight of it both familiar and foreign. He brought it halfway to his lips, but his breath caught. He couldn't, not yet. He tucked the tintype into his shirt pocket, the cold metal resting against his skin. He closed the harmonica in his fist and climbed back down the ladder. The girls had finished. The cornbread was gone, the cups empty. They watched him, their hunger momentarily sated, their exhaustion profound. "Was that Mama?" Hazel asked, her voice quiet. She pointed at the tintype he was still holding, though he'd thought it hidden. Elias looked at the photo, then at her. He nodded, unable to speak. He set it on the table, leaning it against the salt crock so it faced them. Hazel stared at the image of the smiling woman. "She looks different." "Her hair is long." Elias swallowed. "Yes. Mama told us," Hazel said, her voice taking on a formal, recited quality, "that if the sky turned dark and the storms came, we were to find the man who ties his reins with a boon knot." Elias's blood went cold. The boon knot. It wasn't a real knot name. It was his knot, a specific, complicated loop and hitch he'd devised himself to secure a horse. It never slipped, never jammed, even in ice. No one else used it. He had taught it to Rosalie one afternoon, laughing, calling it by his own name. "She told you that," he breathed. "She said it's the safest knot in the territory," Hazel said, parroting a phrase that was clearly not her own. "She said you would keep us safe." Before Elias could process this, Wren, the quiet one, pushed her small canvas bag onto the table. She fumbled with the drawstring, her small fingers clumsy with fatigue. She pulled out a single, crumpled piece of cardstock. It was a postcard. It was bent, stained with water and dirt. The picture on the front was a crude drawing of a large, pine-covered mountain. Elias turned it over. The handwriting was not Rosalie's. It was the careful, shaky script of an older person. It was addressed to no one. It just said, Copper Creek Clinic, and below that, a location, Montana Territory. In the corner, a faded purple postmark was just barely legible. The year read 1888, a year ago, Montana, not Arizona, not burned to ash in the Colorado River. "Mama was sick," Wren whispered, her voice cracking. "She coughed a lot. The blankets got spots." "She slept," Hazel added, taking over, her voice low. "She slept a lot, and sometimes she talked. She always said your name." Elias stared at the postcard. Copper Creek Clinic, Montana. She said Elias, like she was thirsty. Hazel finished. "And she would make us practice the sign." Hazel looked at Wren, and together, as they had by the gate, they performed the motion, small hands touching their chests, their foreheads, and then pointing at him. The gesture tore through him. It was a secret, a prayer, a piece of their marriage he'd thought was gone forever. He looked down at their feet, which he had failed to wash. They were not bare. They were wearing tiny, worn-out boots. They were made of cheap, cracked leather, but the stitching along the seams was meticulous. And on the outer ankle of each boot, sewn in what looked like bright blue thread, were 2 letters, an H on Hazel's, a W on Wren's. Someone, with aching, loving hands, had stitched their initials, Rosalie. Even sick, even lost, she had cared for them. She had marked them. She had loved them. A sudden, sharp awareness of his own home, his own life, struck him. The guns on the wall, the traps by the door, the layer of dust on Rosalie's empty spinning wheel in the corner. This was no place for children. "You need to know the names of things," he said, the words coming out rough. He needed to anchor them, to anchor himself. He pointed to the kettle. "Kettle, kettle," they whispered back. "Fireplace, fireplace, table, cup, bread." He took them to the basin again, showing them how to pump the water themselves, how to use the soap, how to dry their hands on the sackcloth towel. They learned with a quiet, desperate intensity, as if committing a new set of survival skills to memory. As he watched Hazel carefully fold the towel, just as he had shown her, a spark of warmth, so alien he almost recoiled from it, touched the frozen core of his grief. It was the ember in the ash. The sight of these children, her children, his children, standing in his kitchen, learning the shape of his life. The familiarity was a dull ache growing sharp. This was not a mirage. They were real. He turned from the fragile domestic scene and looked out the small, grimy window toward the property line. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The man in the black hat was gone, but the shadow he cast remained. The questions, held back by the shock and the immediate needs of the children, now flooded in. Cold and hard. Rosalie was alive. For 5 years, she had been alive. Why had she never come home? Who had kept her in Montana, sick in a clinic? For all that time, who had paid for the boots, the postcard, the journey, and the final, chilling question? Who was the man in the black hat? The man who had watched them from the mesquite grove? The man who was... Elias knew with a certainty that settled like ice in his gut. Still out there, he was not just a watcher. He was a guard. And now that the children had breached the perimeter, he was a hunter. The ride to Marrow Pass was silent, save for the rattle of the buckboard and the wind. Elias had spent a restless night, the children asleep in Rosalie's long, cold bed. While he sat at the table, the tintype and the postcard laid out before him like a map to a life he couldn't understand. He'd risen before dawn, harnessed the wagon, and lifted the sleeping girls onto the seat, wrapping them in an old wool blanket. Marrow Pass was not a town. It was a scar, a raw gash of false front buildings, coughing up dust from the 3 saloons, the assay office, and the new, imposing brick facade of the Draeger Consolidated Land Office. It smelled of coal smoke, stale beer, and nervous money. Elias bypassed it all, pulling the wagon up to the one building that offered any sense of order, the sheriff's office. He lifted the girls down. They were spooked by the noise and the staring men, and they clung to his legs as he pushed the door open. The office was small, clean, and smelled of strong coffee and gun oil. Behind a simple pine desk sat a woman. Sheriff Lita McCrae was not what most men expected, and she used that. Her dark hair was pinned in a severe bun. Her eyes were the color of slate, and the badge on her vest looked like it had grown there. She looked up from a ledger, and her gaze missed nothing. "Boone," she said, her voice crisp. "It's been a while. Trouble?" "I don't know what it is," Elias said. He was a quiet man, and the words felt heavy and strange on his tongue. He nudged the girls forward. "These children found my ranch yesterday, alone." Lita's eyes softened for just a fraction of a second as she looked at Hazel and Wren. "Go on." Elias laid the brass medallion on her desk, then the postcard. "The tall one. Hazel, where's this? It was my wife's, the one I made for her." He tapped the postcard. "This was in their bag. They say their mother, Rosalie, sent them. They call me Daddy." Lita McCrae did not laugh. She did not look at him with pity. She picked up the medallion, tested the weight of it. She read the postcard. "Rosalie Quinn," she said, testing the name. "Died on the Agnes May, 1884. That's what I thought, Elias said, his throat tight. For 5 years. I thought that. Lita stood up. Clem at the post office is sorting the morning mail. Let's start there. The post office was a cage of dusty shelves and government notices. Clem, a man who seemed to be made entirely of wire and tobacco stains, looked nervous when the sheriff walked in. Lita, Mr. Boone. Clem, Lita said, wasting no time. She held up the postcard. I need to see your territorial dispatch ledgers. First, the Agnes May disaster, 1884. Clem grumbled but ducked behind the counter, emerging with a massive, dust-caked book. He ran a finger down a page. Here it is. Official passenger list and casualty report. Came over the wire. Awful thing. His finger stopped. Quinn, Rosalie. Yeah, deceased. Note here says, body not recovered. Elias felt the air leave his lungs. Body not recovered. Now, Lita said, her voice sharp. Check your postmarks. Montana Territory. Copper Creek, 1888. Clem pulled a different, smaller ledger. That's a small road. Comes down with the mining dispatches. Yeah, here it is. Copper Creek Clinic. We get mail from me now and again. Matches the stamp. Lita looked at Elias. The postcard was real. The place was real. The timeline, from the fire to the postcard, was a dark, hollow 5-year gap. They stepped back onto the boardwalk. The morning sun now high and hot. The noise from the Brass Horn Saloon across the street spilled out, loud and argumentative. Drager's got the right of it, a voice boomed from the saloon. That track is progress. It's thievery, another shouted. He's pushing men off land they've worked for a decade. It's just business. He's running that spur line right to Devil's Trestle, and anyone in the way is a fool. Heard he's already filed on that widower Boone's place, the one at Sagebrush Cross. Elias went rigid. He started to turn toward the saloon, his hand moving instinctively toward his hip, but Lita's grip on his forearm was like steel. Not now, Elias, not here. That's just saloon talk. But her eyes were hard. Let's go. As they moved past the saloon, a man stepped from the shadows of the alley beside it. He was young, wearing spectacles and a suit that was too warm for the weather. He looked like a preacher, but his eyes were sharp and anxious. Mr. Boone, Mr. Elias Boone. Elias stopped. Who's asking? My name is Jonah Pike, sir, attorney at law. He gestured to a small office 2 doors down. If I could have a moment. It is a matter of extreme urgency regarding your land. Lita nodded. I'll take the girls. Get them some sarsaparilla. Meet me back at the office. Pike's office was a closet filled with books and maps. He cleared a stack of papers from a chair and spoke in a low, hurried voice. Mr. Boone, I'm new in town. I'm trying to make a name for myself by being thorough. I was reviewing county deeds for another client, and I found yours. The original deed to Sagebrush Cross. He unrolled a copy on his desk. It's all in order. Your title is clear. Or it was. He pointed to an addendum, a separate page attached with wax, bearing the county seal. What is that? Elias asked. It's a desertion clause. Mr. Boone, filed anonymously, in 1885, just a few months after your wife was declared deceased. Pike read from the paper. It claims the property holder, Elias Boone, has failed to actively improve, cultivate, or reside on the property. It's a lie, I'm sure, but it was filed. And the territorial charter says that after 5 consecutive years of such a claim being uncontested, the land reverts to the territory for public auction. Elias stared at him. I've been on that land every day. I know, Pike said, wiping his spectacles. But no one told you the claim existed. You never contested it. Mr. Boone, the 5-year anniversary of this filing is in 3 days. Who filed it? It's anonymous, but I can tell you who's been buying every single reverted property at auction for the last 6 months. Silas Drager. The name from the saloon. The man from the land office. He wants your ranch, Mr. Boone. The maps show it's the only parcel with a reliable spring. He needs that spring for the water tower for his spur line to Devil's Trestle. And in 3 days, He's going to get it. Elias walked out of the lawyer's office, the world tilting. He felt like he was breathing dust. His land was being stolen from under him. His wife had been alive, somewhere, while it happened. He saw Lita and the girls coming out of the general store, and then he saw him. Leaning against a hitching post, casual as death, was the man from the ranch. The man in the black hat and the long duster. He wasn't watching from a distance now. He was here. He pushed himself off the post and walked directly into Elias's path. He was tall, with a sun-scorched face and eyes so pale they looked like holes. He ignored Elias and looked down at Hazel and Wren. "Strays," the man said, his voice a low rasp. "Things get lost out here. Best to let lost things stay lost. Boone." Hazel grabbed Elias's trousers, her knuckles white. "Get out of my path," Elias said. His voice was quiet, but it had the flat, dangerous sound of a hammer being cocked. The man smirked. "You're a widower. Ain't you a widower living on borrowed time? My employer, Mr. Drager. He don't like complications. He likes things clean. These girls, they're not clean." He took a step, reaching a gloved hand not for Elias, but toward Hazel's hair. "That's enough." Sheriff McRae's voice was not loud, but it cut through the street noise like a razor. She was standing 10 feet away, her hand not on her gun, but resting near it. The man in the duster slowly turned. "Sheriff, just making conversation with my neighbor." "I don't know you, mister," Lita said. "Which means you're not a neighbor, and your conversation is over. Now, I'm curious what business a man like you has in my town. Just passing through. Men like you don't pass through Marrow Pass unless you're working for the railroad. Let's see your hands." The man smiled, a sour, ugly expression, but he raised his hands. "Now turn around," Lita commanded. The man hesitated. "Turn around." He did, slowly. Lita stepped forward, quick and professional. She patted him down. "No gun," she said. "Smart, but sloppy." She bent and pulled a long, thin dagger from his boot sheath. "What's this for whittling? A man gets lonely." Lita's hand moved to his duster pocket and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. She unfolded one. "Drager Consolidated Payroll," she read. "You're a long way from the track-laying camp, and you're under arrest, carrying a concealed blade and intimidation of a citizen. Move." Back in the cell, Lita dropped the dagger on her desk. The man was in the single cell, staring at the wall. "His name is Cole Hardin," Lita said, pouring Elias a cup of the thick, black coffee. "He's Drager's top man, a union buster from back east. Now, a land clearer." She sat. "While you were with Pike, I sent a wire to the U.S., Marshall in Montana. He owed me." She slid a thin piece of paper across the desk. The telegraph reply. "He checked with the Copper Creek Clinic," Lita said. "They took in a female patient, a Jane Doe, in the fall of 1884, just after the Agnes May fire. She had severe burns, smoke inhalation, and total amnesia." Elias gripped the edge of the desk. "It's her. She was there for nearly 3 years." Lita continued, her voice low. "But here's the part that ties it all together. The marshal checked their books. All her bills, her lodging, her food. All of it. Paid for by a private benefactor. A bank draft sent from Tucson every month. The clinic ledger only had 2 initials for the account." Elias looked at her. "S.D." Lita said. "Silas Drager." The pieces slammed into place, cold and jagged. Drager hadn't just found Rosalie. He had taken her. He'd rescued her from the fire, found her broken and without memory, and hidden her 1,000 miles away. He'd paid to keep her sick and quiet, declared her dead, and filed a false claim on Elias's land, all to get the water for his railroad. He'd been playing a 5-year game. "He's been watching me," Elias whispered. "All this time. And now," Lita said, "his game is almost over, which leaves you, Elias, in the worst position possible." She leaned forward. "You have 2 choices. You ride to Montana. You find Rosalie. But that Hardin fellow was just a taste. Drager has a private army. You'll be riding into a hornet's nest, and it'll take you weeks. By the time you get there, Even if you find her, your land will be gone. The desertion claim will be final. Draeger wins. And the other choice, you stay, you fight him in court, you, me, and Pike. We prove the claim is a fraud. We prove you've worked the land, but you'll be fighting the railroad and all its money. It'll be ugly. And the second Draeger knows you're fighting him here, he'll move Rosalie. You'll never find her. She'll be gone for good. Elias looked at his hands, calloused and stained. He looked at the cell, where the man who had threatened his daughter sat. He looked at Hazel and Wren, who had fallen asleep, huddled together on the bench. He thought of 5 years of cold fires, 5 years of silence. I'm going to Montana. Elias. He doesn't get to keep her, Elias said. The words were quiet, but they were iron. A living wife, sheriff, that voids any desertion claim filed by a widower. I'll bring her back. What about the girls? Lita asked. Reverend Miller and his wife. Elias said. They're good people. Can you ask them? I'll do more than ask, Lita said. I'll post a deputy on their porch. They'll be safe. Elias nodded, his throat thick. He walked to the bench and knelt. He gently shook Hazel awake. Wren stirred, rubbing her eyes. I have to go away for a little while, he said, his voice rough. I have to go find Mama. Hazel's face, which had been so brave, crumpled. She launched herself at him, her arms locking around his neck. No, the man in the hat, he'll come back. He's in that cage, Elias said, holding her tight, his eyes burning. And Sheriff McCrae won't let him out. You have to be strong. For Wren. Wren, however, was not crying. She looked at him with Rosalie's old, solemn eyes. She reached a tiny hand into his shirt pocket, her fingers finding the hard shape of the harmonica he had taken from the loft. She pushed it deeper into his pocket and whispered, her voice so quiet it was just a breath against his cheek. Take the music box. Daddy, take it. Mama will remember. She'll remember the waltz. Elias Boone rode north. He did not ride like a man seeking answers. He rode like a man running from a ghost and chasing another. He left Merrow Pass with the sun at his back, pushing his Pinto hard, trading the familiar, scorched flatlands of Arizona for the broken, alien country of the high territories. He carried a saddlebag with jerky, cartridges, the postcard, and the harmonica that felt like a lead weight in his pocket. The land changed from alkali dust to towering red rock. He rode through the painted basin, a wound in the earth so vast and silent it felt like the landscape of a dead planet. The heat was a physical weight, a hammer blow with every sunrise. He rode for 18 hours a day, sleeping in the saddle or for brief, dreamless stretches under cold stars. He was not a man anymore. He was a single, burning purpose. He cleared the basin and climbed, the air thinning, growing cold. He pushed the Pinto up the spine of Wind Needle Ridge, a 1,000-foot-high razor of granite that split the high desert from the mountains. The wind here never stopped. It screamed, a high, thin sound that plucked at his nerves. It was on the third night, in the shadow of the ridge, that he ran into the wolves. They were high country shadows, gray and starving. He was tending to his horse's hoof when the Pinto shied, snorting in terror. He looked up. A ring of yellow eyes regarded him from the darkness. 6, maybe 7 of them. They were desperate, drawn by the smell of the horse. His rifle was in the scabbard, 20 feet away. His pistol was at his hip, but he knew he only had 6 shots. It was not enough. The pack leader, a large, scarred male, lunged. Elias did not draw his gun. He moved with the fluid, ingrained speed of a lifetime's work. His hand snatched the lariat coiled at his saddle horn. It was a long, 60-foot rawhide rope, perfectly balanced. As the wolf leaped, Elias's wrist snapped. The loop sailed out, a perfect, wide circle in the moonlight. It settled over the wolf's head and shoulders, and Elias yanked, pulling the horsehair Honda knot tight. The wolf hit the end of the rope and was flipped, crashing to the rocky ground with a choked yelp. Elias didn't hesitate. He dallied the rope to his saddle horn, vaulted onto the Pinto's back, and spurred the horse into a gallop. dragging the alpha wolf behind him. The rest of the pack, confused and terrified by this sudden, violent turn, scattered into the darkness. He rode for 100 yards before he stopped, cut the rope, and let the dazed, gasping animal free. He fired a single shot into the air, and the darkness swallowed the last of the shadows. He did not stop to make camp. He rode on. He crossed into the Montana high country 2 days later, the air smelling of pine and imminent snow. He was following a high, dangerous trail when he saw the wreck. It was a small passenger carriage, one wheel shattered, the axle broken. It lay on its side in a dry creek bed. One of its 2 horses dead, the other hopelessly tangled in its harness. Elias dismounted, rifle in hand. He approached cautiously. He heard a sound, not a cry for help, but a string of furious, frustrated curses. A woman was pinned inside the carriage, her arm trapped at an unnatural angle, her face pale with pain and rage. She wore a sensible blue traveling suit, and her red hair had come loose, spilling over her face. "Well, don't just stand there, you great lummox," she snapped, trying to pull her arm free. "Get this thing off me before I bleed out." Elias holstered his rifle. He calmed the panicked horse, cut it free, and then turned his attention to the carriage. "This is going to hurt," he said. "It already hurts," she retorted. He put his shoulder to the frame. It was too heavy. He brought the pinto over, tied his lariat to the undercarriage, and used the horse's strength to slowly, agonizingly, lift the wreck just enough. The woman scrambled free, clutching her left arm, her face tight with pain. "It's broken," she said, stating a fact. Elias looked at her. "You're a long way from anywhere." "I was," she corrected. "On my way to Bozeman. My name is Maeve Alcott. I'm a nurse." Elias's head snapped up. "A nurse from where?" "I work the mining camps mostly," she said, wincing as she tried to move her fingers. "But I've been based out of a small clinic for the last year. Place called Copper Creek." The name hit Elias like a physical blow. He stood frozen. Maeve looked at him, her sharp eyes taking in his trail-worn appearance, the desperation in his gaze. "What is it?" "I'm going to Copper Creek," he said, his voice low. "I have to find it. Fast." She looked at the sky, then at the steep pass ahead. "The main road is washed out by the spring thaw. It'll take you a week to go around." "I don't have a week." Maeve studied him. "You saved my life, Mr. Boone, Elias Boone." Her sharp intake of breath was audible over the wind. She stared at him, her eyes wide, all the fight gone from her face, replaced by a sudden, profound recognition. "Elias," she whispered. "My God, it's you. You know me. I knew a patient back at Copper Creek." She was speaking quickly now, the words tumbling out. "A woman. They found her after a steamship fire on the Colorado. 5 years back. The smoke. It addled her. She had no memory. None. We called her Jane." Elias grabbed the pommel of his saddle to keep his hands from shaking. "What about her?" "She was sweet," Maeve said, her voice softening. "But she was haunted. She'd wake up in the night, crying. She'd say one word, over and over. Elias. She'd say it like a prayer." He couldn't speak. He just stared. "She had a small brass medallion," Maeve continued, "stamped with a cypress tree. She wore it always, said it was the only thing she remembered. She lost it about a year ago, dropped it somewhere on the grounds. She was inconsolable for a week. Elias pulled the matching medallion from his own neck. He didn't have to show it to her. "I need to find her. Maeve!" Maeve looked at the broken carriage, then at him. "You will. I'll show you the shortcut. The miners call it the Devil's Tooth. It's a high pass, covered in ice even in summer, but it will cut 3 days off your ride. It'll put you in the Copper Creek Valley by tomorrow night." He splinted her arm, got her onto her remaining horse, and they rode. She pointed him to the pass, a barely visible track that went straight up the mountainside. "Godspeed, Elias Boone," she said. "Find her." He rode the pass, the wind biting through his duster, the pinto's hooves skittering on the blue ice. He came down the other side as the sun was setting. The vast, pine-filled valley of Copper Creek spread out below him. He bypassed the clinic. He needed more information. He rode to a small, run-down mail station at the edge of the valley, a place that smelled of damp wool and old paper. The station agent was an old man with a pipe. Elias laid the postcard on the counter. "I'm looking for the woman who sent this. From the clinic, Jane Doe." The old man squinted. "Oh, aye, the lost one. She wasn't at the clinic for long, not in the last year, anyway. Where did she go?" "A good family, the Larks, took her in. They have a farm up the valley. Said the clinic air was bad for her cough. She was with them must have been most of the winter." "Is she there now?" The old man shook his head. "No. Someone came for her. Back in the spring. A man in a fine suit. From the railroad." Elias's blood ran cold. The railroad. Aye, the Draeger line. They're surveying all through here. This man, he paid the Larks a tidy sum for their trouble. Said the woman needed special care. Moved her." "Where?" Elias demanded. The old man gestured with his pipe. "Up the valley, toward the new, raw slash in the forest where the railroad was being built. To the new place, the Hemlock Sanitarium. Built it special, right near the Draeger rail line, very private. They say it's for nervous patients. Folks go in. They don't much come out." That night, Elias made a cold camp on a ridge overlooking the valley. He was too close to risk a fire. The pines were thick, the air sharp and cold. He could see it, miles distant. A single, large building, gray and forbidding. On the far side of the valley, Hemlock. He was trembling, with cold, with fear, with a rage so profound it choked him. She was there. After 5 years, she was just there, locked in a building paid for by the man who was stealing his land. He thought of his daughters, their small, trusting faces. He thought of Wren's whisper, "Take the music box, Daddy." His fumbling, cold fingers pulled the harmonica from his pocket. He hadn't played in 5 years. His lips were chapped, his breath unsteady. He brought the cold tin to his mouth. He played. It was just a few notes at first, hesitant and thin. Then the melody found him. The Copper Creek Waltz, Rosalie's song. It was a simple, aching tune. It spilled out into the vast, cold darkness. A thread of sound, a ribbon of memory. It echoed off the granite peaks. A lonely, desperate call to a soul he wasn't sure could even hear him. He woke before dawn, the tune still haunting his mind. He was packing his bedroll when he saw them. Hoof prints. Not his, a single rider. Shod horse. The tracks were fresh, cutting right through his own from the night before. Someone was following him. He mounted the Pinto and moved, not toward the sanitarium, but into a narrow ravine that led down the ridge. He kept his pace steady, knowing the watcher was somewhere behind or above. The crack of the rifle was deafening. The bullet screamed off the rock face inches from his head, stinging his cheek with granite chips. He didn't think. He reacted. He kicked the Pinto, rounding a sharp bend in the ravine, the horse's hooves striking sparks. Another shot rang out, high and wide. The gunman was on the ridge above, firing down. Elias leaped from the saddle, letting the horse gallop on as a decoy. He scrambled up the steep, rocky side of the ravine, opposite from the shooter, using the boulders for cover. He was a rancher. He knew rock and leverage. He climbed fast, his breath burning in his lungs. He circled above his own trail. He saw the ambusher. The man was focused on the horse, moving along the ridge for a clearer shot. He wore a heavy duster and a brass badge that glinted in the morning light. Draeger security. Elias came up behind him, silent on the pine needles. He didn't draw his gun. He grabbed the man's rifle, yanking it back, and slammed his shoulder into the man's back. They went down in a tangle of limbs. The man was fast, clawing for a pistol, but Elias was stronger, fueled by a pure, cold fury. He pinned the man's arms, grabbed his own pistol, and pressed the cold muzzle against the man's throat. "Who sent you?" Elias roared. "Go to hell." Elias cocked the hammer. "I'm looking for my wife. You've got 1 second. The man's bravado broke. He was just a hired gun. Paid for a job, not to die for it. Hardin Cole Hardin sent me, he gasped. The man you saw in town, he wired ahead, said you'd be coming. Why? Elias pressed the barrel harder. Why try to kill me? Not kill, the man choked. Just slow you down, Wing, you make you turn back, it's just a job. What about the woman, the patient at Hemlock? The gunman laughed. A desperate, broken sound. The woman. She's the whole damn point. Drager's got her locked up tight. Why? The man's eyes were wide with terror. He blurted it out, the words tumbling, desperate to save his own life. You just had to stay put. You just had to be a widower for 3 more days. My orders were just to keep you off this mountain, just keep her quiet until after the deed signing. The words hung in the cold morning air. Until after the deed signing. 3 days. Jonah Pike's voice. The desertion claim. Elias stood up. The world spinning. It was all one piece. The fire, the amnesia, the clinic, the land. Drager wasn't just stealing his ranch. He was holding Rosalie hostage to do it. He looked down the valley. He could see the slate roof of the Hemlock Sanitarium, dark against the green pines. He had been chasing a ghost for 5 years. Now he was chasing a deadline. Time was no longer his. He was running against the clock, and it was almost out. Elias did not ride back to the pass. He cut east, doubling back toward the main road, pushing the Pinto through the pine and shale. He found Maeve Alcott where he had left her, sitting by a cold fire, her splinted arm resting on her lap. He has her, Elias said, dismounting before the horse even stopped. The words were torn from his throat. Drager. He has her locked in a sanitarium. Hemlock. Maeve's face, already pale with her own pain, went paler still. God help her. Hemlock. That's no place for a... Mr. Boone. Hemlock is not a hospital. It's a warehouse for families with money and secrets. It's run by a man named Finch, a doctor who lost his license. He answers to Drager and Drager alone. The man I caught, Elias said, his voice flat and cold, said I have 3 days. 3 days until he steals my land. He's holding her until that deed is signed. Then we have no time. Maeve struggled to her feet. Finch knows me. I've sent patients there, before I knew what it was. He trusts me, or at least he trusts my credentials. He'll have guards. That gunman wasn't the only one. Guards, yes, but they're brutes, not thinkers. Maeve said, her mind working fast. They'll be watching the roads, but they won't be watching for a nurse making a routine delivery. My carriage is gone, but my supply wagon is at the mail station. It's 2 hours from here. They rode in the dying light. A desperate, broken pair. Maeve's supply wagon was old, loaded with blankets, medical texts, and bottles of laudanum and carbolic. They traveled through the night, arriving on the ridge above Hemlock as a cold, gray dawn broke. The sanitarium was exactly as the mail agent had described. It was a large, gray wooden building, 2 stories high, with a steep slate roof. It loomed out of the pine forest like a rotten tooth. Every window was shut, the curtains drawn. By the heavy oak door, a polished brass plaque gleamed dully in the morning light. It read, The Drager Benevolent Fund for Mining Families. Benevolent, Maeve spat. He hides his cruelty behind charity. How do we do this? Elias asked, his eyes scanning the building. A single curl of smoke rose from a kitchen chimney. Finch is a creature of habit, Maeve explained. He makes his rounds at 9. The orderlies are lazy. I'll go to the front door. I'll tell them I have an emergency transfer from the camps. A patient with delirium. I'll make a scene. I'll demand to see Finch, and I'll keep him and the head orderly busy in the parlor for as long as I can. She reached into a crate and handed him a small tin. Peppermint tea. The patient we called Jane. She always asked for it. It was the only thing she seemed to remember how to ask for. And me, Maeve pointed to the side of the building, where a low structure led to the cellars. The coal chute. It's the only way in that isn't locked. It leads to the boiler room. From there, a door goes into the main hall cellar. Her room is number 7. Back wing, second floor. The lock is old. A good shove should break the jam. And getting out. Once you have her, Maeve said, her one good hand gripping the reins. Don't come back for me. Go to the cellar door at the back. It leads to the woods. I'll circle the wagon around and meet you at the creek. Go, and God go with you. Elias watched her drive the wagon down the main track. He slid from the pinto, leaving it untethered, and moved like a shadow through the trees. He found the coal chute. It was a rusty iron door, bolted, but the bolts were old. He used his boot knife as a lever, and the metal shrieked as the wood splintered. He slid into the darkness. The chute was steep, tight, and smelled of soot and damp earth. He landed in a pile of coal in the boiler room. The air was hot and thick. He moved to the cellar door. It was unlocked. He was in a long, dark stone hallway, smelling of root vegetables, lye, and something sour. He could hear footsteps above him. On the main floor, he heard Maeve's voice, sharp and commanding. Doctor, Finch, I have a patient in acute distress. Your orderly refuses to let me see you. This is an outrage. My patient is a ward of the Draeger Mining Company, and if he dies of neglect... He heard a man's flustered, oily voice. Nurse Alcott, what is this? Calm yourself. Bring her into the parlor. The voices faded. Elias moved. He found the stairs, creaking with every step, and emerged in the back wing. The silence here was different. It was heavy, drugged. The air smelled of carbolic acid and old linen. He walked past rooms 1, 3, 5. The doors were heavy wood, each with a small sliding peephole. He found it. Number 7. He put his hand on the knob. It was locked. He remembered Maeve's words. A good shove. He put his shoulder where the lock was, braced his feet, and threw his entire weight against it. The wood splintered with a sound like a pistol shot. The door flew open. The room was gray. A single bed, an iron frame, a small, barred window looking out onto the pines, and a woman. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the window. Her hair, the long, chestnut hair he had buried his face in, was gone. It was shorn short, unevenly, like a convict's. She wore a thin gray cotton shift. She was so thin. Her shoulder blades were sharp wings against the fabric. She did not start at the sound. She turned her head slowly, without fear, without curiosity. Elias's breath caught in his throat. It was her. But it was not. The lines of her face were hollowed by sickness and time. A faint, silvery scar ran from her right temple, disappearing into her shorn hair. But the eyes, they were the worst. They were Rosalie's eyes. The same almond shape, the same green gold, but he had known them as bright, fierce, full of laughter and fire. These eyes were like the surface of a pond in deep winter, frozen, empty, reflecting nothing. There was no recognition, none. Rosalie, he whispered. The name felt like sacrilege. She tilted her head. Her gaze drifted to the tin of tea in his hand. Her voice was a dry rustle, a sound of disuse. How did you know? She asked. How did you know I like peppermint tea? He felt his knees go weak. This stranger knew the tea, but not the man who had brought it to her every morning for 3 years. He stepped into the room. He did not have time for gentle reintroductions. He did not have time to weep. He put the tin on the small table. He knelt in front of her. I am Elias, he said, his voice raw. Elias Boone, I am your husband. She flinched, a small, bird-like motion. No, that's the name. The name from the dark. She looked at him. A flicker of something. Fear. In the frozen depths. You are from the dream. The man who smells of pine smoke. You are not real. I am real, he said, grabbing her thin, cold hands. Her skin was like paper. And you are real. You are Rosalie Quinn. You are my wife. We have a home, Sagebrush Cross. We have 2 children, Hazel and Wren. They are 4 years old. They are waiting for us. The names. Hazel. Wren. It was as if he had struck her. She gasped, a sound like a dry sob, and tore her hands from his. Her hands flew to the scar on her temple, pressing hard, as if to hold her own head together. No, she whispered, rocking back and forth. No, the children. They said the children were gone. The fire. The fire was 5 years ago, he said, desperation making his voice harsh. The fire, she cried out, her eyes squeezed shut. The whistle, so loud. The deck. It was hot. The paint was burning. The smell. She was breathing in short, sharp gasps. The water. It was so cold. I couldn't breathe. Rosalie. A hand, she whispered, her eyes wide now, staring through him. A hand. It pulled me. Into a boat. It wasn't you. Who? Rosalie. Who pulled you out? A man, she said, her voice trembling. He was in the boat. He wrapped me in a blanket. He smelled rich, like spices, like musk, an expensive smell. She shuddered. A violent, full-body tremor. He said, you are safe. He said my old life was burned away. He said he would take care of me. He said my name was Jane. Footsteps hammered in the hallway, shouting, Finch, he's in the back wing, room 7. Rosalie, look at me. Elias hauled her to her feet. She was limp, a rag doll. He lied. He stole you. He stole our lives. We are going home, now. The door crashed open, the broken jamb giving way. 2 burly orderlies in stained white tunics filled the doorway. What in the... Grab him. Elias was not a gunman, not a brawler by choice, but he was a rancher, and he was strong. He didn't move toward them. He shoved the heavy iron bedstead, flipping it on its side, wedging it in the doorway. It was a perfect, instant barricade. Get him, you idiots! He's got the patient, he heard Finch shriek from the hall. Elias turned. The window was barred. The tunnel, he said, remembering Maeve's backup plan. There has to be a tunnel. He scanned the floor. It was an old building, near the cold, empty fireplace. One of the floorboards was cut differently from the others. He kicked it. It was loose. He tore it up with his bare hands, the wood splintering. Below was not a tunnel, but a dark, narrow utility space, a crawl space for old pipes. It was thick with cobwebs and the smell of dead, dry earth. It's the only way, he said. He grabbed Rosalie around the waist. No, the dark, I can't, she screamed, fighting him. I've got you, he roared over her panic. I will not let you go. He dropped them both into the darkness, onto the packed dirt below. He pulled the floorboard back into place, just as the orderlies smashed the bed frame aside. He half-dragged, half-carried her through the suffocating blackness, following the line of cold pipes. Rosalie was sobbing, a high, thin sound of terror. They crawled for what felt like an eternity, scraping their hands and knees on the hard-packed earth. They came to a stone wall, a cellar door, barred from the inside. Elias threw his weight against the bar. It fell away. They tumbled out into the blinding, wet daylight. The sky had opened. A mountain thunderstorm was raging, rain lashing down in sheets, thunder cracking so loud it shook the ground. And there, just inside the trees, was Maeve, her supply wagon's canvas cover flapping in the wind. Her good hand held the reins of the terrified horses. Get in! Get in! She screamed over the storm. Elias threw Rosalie into the back of the wagon, onto a pile of blankets, and scrambled in after her. Maeve cracked the whip, and the wagon lurched, wheels sliding in the mud, and plunged into the forest, away from the gray prison. Inside the covered wagon, it was chaos. They were thrown against the sides, soaked and gasping. Rosalie was huddled against the crates, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She stared at Elias, his face streaked with soot and rain, lit by the periodic, violent flashes of lightning. Her hand, covered in dirt and blood from the crawl space, lifted. It was trembling violently. She touched her own chest. She touched her forehead. And then, her finger, shaking, pointed directly at him. Her lips parted. A whisper, so quiet it was almost lost in the roar of the rain on the canvas. Elias. He stopped breathing. The word was broken. A question. a memory trying to break the surface of the ice. He moved toward her, crawling over the lurching floor. He brushed the wet, shorn hair from her face. Her eyes were still wide with terror, but in their depths, something flickered. A single, small ember. He leaned forward, his heart aching with a pain and a hope so vast it threatened to tear him apart. He did not kiss her lips. He pressed his mouth to her forehead, to the cold, damp skin just above her scar. He held it there, a long, desperate, silent promise. "I've got you," he whispered against her skin, the storm raging around them. "I'm not leaving you, not ever again." The stable at Copper Creek Junction smelled of damp hay, old leather, and the sharp, clean scent of the high mountain rain that hammered relentlessly on the roof. It was a cold, leaking refuge. Maeve had lit a single lantern, which cast long, dancing shadows that made the small space feel haunted. Elias stood by the splintered door, watching the mud turn to soup in the yard, his entire body thrumming with a violent, contained energy. Maeve was tending to Rosalie, who sat on a bale of hay wrapped in a horse blanket. She was trembling, not just from the cold, but from the aftershocks of 5 years of stolen life crashing back into her. Maeve finished cleaning the scrapes on Rosalie's hands from the crawl space, her one good hand working with practiced efficiency. "It all connects," Elias said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't speaking to either of them. He was piecing it together aloud. "The fire, the Agnes May, 1884. "He was there," Rosalie whispered. Her voice was stronger now. No longer the dry rustle of hemlock. "The man with the expensive smell, Drager. He pulled me from the water. He told me I was the only survivor." "He didn't save you," Elias said, turning from the door, his eyes burning in the lantern light. "He abducted you. He found you with no memory and saw an opportunity." Maeve nodded, tying off a bandage. "An opportunity to keep you quiet, to make you Jane Doe. He paid the clinic, and when you started to get better, he moved you to Hemlock. He isolated you. He paid Finch to keep you drugged and forgotten." "But why?" Rosalie asked, her eyes finding Elias's. "Why me? Why us?" "The land," Elias said, the words tasting like ash. "My ranch, Sagebrush Cross. It's the only parcel with a reliable spring for 50 miles. Jonah Pike, the lawyer, he found the filing, a desertion claim, lodged against me right after the fire. He said it expires in 2 days. Maeve's eyes widened. "The Devil's Trestle Spur. Of course, Drager needs that spring for his water tower. Without it, his entire railroad spur is useless. He couldn't buy you out, so he made you a widower. He manufactured a desertion. He waited 5 years for the land to legally fall into his hands. He has been playing a 5-year game," Elias said. "And he's 2 days from winning." "We have the truth," Maeve said. "But we have no proof. It's your word, Elias, and the word of a woman he's declared legally dead and kept locked away as an amnesiac, against the richest man in the territory." A hard, sudden knock echoed through the stable. Elias moved, his hand dropping to his pistol. He put himself between the door and Rosalie, shielding her. "Who is it? Boone, open this door, or I'll kick it in. I didn't ride 1,000 miles to get shot by the man I'm trying to save." Elias froze. He knew that voice. He slid the bar. The door burst open, letting in a swirl of rain and wind. Sheriff Lita McCrae stood framed in the doorway, soaked to the skin, her face caked in mud, her duster heavy with water. She looked like she'd been to hell and back. "McCrae," Elias breathed, stunned. "I put your man Hardin in the territorial jail," she said, storming in, peeling off her gloves. "But I knew Drager's reach was longer than Arizona. I took the express train as far as Utah, and I've been in the saddle for 48 hours straight. I figured you'd stir the nest." Her eyes fell on Rosalie, who was staring, wide-eyed, from the hay bale. Lita stopped, her hard gaze softening for a bare second. She slowly removed her hat. "Mrs. Boone, I presume." "This is—" Elias started. "We don't have time for reunions," Lita said, pulling a folded, damp paper from her oilskin pouch. I went to the territorial judge in Tucson. I told him I had new evidence in a missing persons case tied to the Agnes May. He was skeptical, but he issued it. She thrust the paper at Elias. A temporary stay. A legal halt on the desertion claim. It stops the auction of your land. Elias felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. It's over. It's not, Lita said, her voice sharp as glass. It's a 72-hour stay. Boone, that's all he'd give me. 72 hours to produce irrefutable proof that the claim was fraudulent. That means hard evidence. Invoices, letters, witnesses. Not just a story. After that, the gavel falls. Sagebrush Cross is gone. 72 hours. The clock was running. Then we need proof, Maeve said, standing up. We need to prove Drager paid to keep Rosalie hidden. We need to prove he did it to steal the land. We can't, Elias said, pacing the length of the stable. The clinic's books just had his initials. Hemlock is his fortress. We can't get in. We don't have to, Maeve said, her voice dropping, charged with a new idea. Drager's arrogant. He runs his entire empire, the mines, the railroad, and his charity, through the same set of books. He pays for Hemlock, the bribes to the land office, the payroll for Hardin's gunmen, all from the same account. It's all in his private ledgers. And where are those? Lita asked, wiping mud from her face. On his private mail car, Maeve said. It's attached to the midnight mail train. It passes through this station, Copper Creek Junction, every night. It stops for exactly 10 minutes to take on water and transfer the mining payroll. Lita and Elias looked at each other. A heist? It's impossible, Elias said. That car will be locked. It'll be guarded by Drager's men. It will, Maeve agreed. And the depot manager here, Otto Vale. He's Drager's man. He oversees the transfer. He never leaves the platform. Rosalie, who had been silent, listening, spoke. Her voice was quiet, but clear. Otto Vale. The three of them turned to look at her. I know him, Rosalie said. She was looking at her hands, digging into a memory. He's short. He smells of sausage and cloves. He came to Hemlock. Once a month. He brought papers for Dr. Finch to sign. He brought me peppermint tea. He thought he was being kind. You remember him, Elias said, stepping closer. I remember his weakness, Rosalie said, her gaze lifting. He was there one night, in Finch's office. He was drinking. One of the orderlies was whistling a tune. An old waltz, Otto. He started to cry. He got sentimental. He talked about his home, back in Germany. He said the music reminded him of his mother. She looked at Elias, her eyes moving to the shirt pocket where he still kept the harmonica. The breath caught in his throat. The waltz, the Copper Creek waltz. He got sloppy, Rosalie whispered, the memory coming faster, sentimental and sloppy. He left his ring of keys on the desk and went outside to smoke, to be sad alone. He was gone for 5 minutes. A plan, desperate and sharp, formed in the small stable. It's a long shot, Lita said, her hand resting on her gun. It's the only shot, Elias countered. He began to pace, laying it out. All right, here's how we do it. The train arrives at midnight. We have 10 minutes. Lita, you're the distraction. You know railroad signals. You create a problem down the track. A crossed signal. A spooked horse on the line. Something to pull the platform guards away from that car. Easy, Lita said, a grim smile touching her lips. Maeve, Elias continued. You'll be here, with the wagon, engine running, ready to move. And us, Rosalie asked. Elias looked at her. Me, I go for the car, while the guards are gone and Otto is distracted. I get inside. I find that ledger. I get out. How do you distract Otto? Rosalie asked. He won't leave his post for a crossed signal. Elias looked at her, his jaw tight. I know. No, Rosalie said, standing up, the horse blanket pooling at her feet. Me, I'll be the distraction. Rosalie, no, Elias said instantly. It's too dangerous. He'll recognize you. Will he? She said. She stepped into the lantern light. She was still painfully thin, her hair shorn, her face pale. He knew Jane, a quiet, sick, half-dead woman in a gray shift. He won't recognize me. Not like this. I'll go to the depot office. I'll say I'm a traveler, that I'm looking for a relative. I'll get him talking. And the music. You'll be outside the window, she said. When you hear me mention Germany, you play. Rosalie, I can't ask you to do that. After all, he's after Hemlock. She walked right up to him, stopping so close he could see the fire returning to her eyes. The ice was gone. This was the woman he had married. Draeger's men are hunting us. Lita's stay is only good for 72 hours. We can't just run. We have to finish this. We have to do it now. She laid a hand on his chest, right over his heart. He took 5 years from me, Elias, she said, her voice shaking, but not with fear, with rage. He made me forget your face. He made me forget the faces of my own children. He made me a ghost. If I can forget you for 5 years, I can sure as hell remember you to end this. Elias looked at her, at the stranger who was his wife, his partner, his everything. He covered her hand with his. All right, Elias said. We have a 3-part plan. First, we get the ledger. Tonight, second, we ride. We don't stop until we reach Marrow Pass. We take that ledger, and we go public. We take it straight to the Brass Horn, right where the Tucson reporters drink. We'll read Draeger's crimes to the whole town. And third, Lita finished, chambering around into her rifle. We take the ledger, the press, and half the town with us to Jonah Pike. We file it with the court before the deadline. We save Sagebrush Cross, and we bury Silas Draeger. They had hours to wait until midnight, hours that stretched into a cold, damp eternity. The stable at Copper Creek Junction was not a refuge. It was a holding cell. Lita McCrae had taken the first watch, her figure a stiff, silent silhouette by the main door, her rifle resting in the crook of her arm. Maeve, exhausted and in pain from her splinted arm, had finally succumbed to a dose of her own laudanum, sleeping fitfully in the wagon bed. The rain had finally stopped. The only sounds were the drip of water from the eaves, the nervous stamp of a horse, and the low, heavy sigh of the wind through the high cypress trees. The air was sharp, scoured clean by the storm, and carried the rich, resinous scent of pine and wet earth. Elias and Rosalie stood just inside the open stable doorway, looking out at the darkness that separated them from the depot. The plan was set. Every piece was in its place. Now, there was only the waiting. Rosalie shivered, pulling the coarse horse blanket tighter around her shoulders. She was still wearing the thin, gray shift from Hemlock, a brutal reminder of where she had been. Elias saw the tremor. He turned, pulling a cleaner, drier wool blanket from his own saddle roll. He stepped behind her and gently, his movements awkward, draped it over the horse blanket, tucking it around her shoulders. His hands, rough from rope and iron and earth, brushed her neck. She did not pull away. He let his hands rest there for a moment, his calloused thumbs brushing the base of her skull, where her hair had been crudely shorn. His gaze traveled up to the faint, silvery line on her temple, the scar. His fingers, almost of their own accord, moved to it. He traced the mark, a line of damaged skin that separated his world from hers, the before from the after. His touch was light as a feather, but it carried the weight of 5 lost years. His eyes, when she turned her head to look at him, were a storm of emotions she could not yet read, a profound, aching sorrow for the pain he hadn't been there to stop, and a gratitude so fierce it was almost violent, a gratitude that she was alive, scarred. But here, he'll pay for this, he whispered. It was not a threat, it was a statement of fact, as calm and final as the granite peaks around them. Rosalie just watched him, her gaze unwavering. She saw the man who had pulled her from the dark, but his face was harder. The lines around his eyes and mouth cut deeper. He was her husband, but he was a stranger. The silence between them stretched, filled with the things they could not say, the questions he had, The memories she did not. Elias broke the stillness. He reached into his shirt pocket, his fingers closing around the cold tin and wood. He pulled out the harmonica. He didn't offer it to her, not at first. He just looked at it, lying heavy in his palm. "Wren told me to bring it," he said, his voice rough. She said, Mama will remember the waltz." Rosalie stared at the harmonica, the music box. A fog in her mind swirled, a melody, a feeling of warmth, of laughter, of a time before the cold water in the gray room. Hesitantly, she reached out and took it from his hand. Her fingers were thin, the knuckles scraped raw from the crawlspace. It felt alien, yet familiar. She lifted it to her lips, her breath unsteady. She blew. A single, reedy note, thin and sour, wailed in the stable. It was the sound of a lost thing. She flinched, frustration and shame clouding her face. "I can't, Elias, I don't remember." Her hand, holding the harmonica, began to tremble and fall. His hand, large and warm, came up to cover hers. He didn't take the instrument. He simply steadied her, his fingers lacing with hers, his thumb pressing into her palm. He gently, firmly, lifted her hand back to her mouth. "You do," he whispered, his face close to hers. "It's in there. Just breathe. Don't think. Just breathe." She closed her eyes. She felt the solid presence of him beside her, his hand supporting hers. She took a breath and tried again. A few notes stumbled out, broken, hesitant, then a phrase, a short, sweet, aching melody that rose and fell like a sigh. The Copper Creek Waltz. Her breath hitched, choking the last note. A single hot tear escaped her closed eye. She remembered. Not the name, not the time, but the feeling of sunshine on her face, of his arms around her after a long ride. The memory was not a picture. It was an emotion, raw and overwhelming. She lowered the harmonica. Their hands still joined. She opened her eyes and looked up at him. She saw the man she had married. His shoulders, broad and solid under his damp cloak. His face, streaked with mud from the ravine, but his jaw set with a resolve that was achingly familiar. He was the anchor. The man who smelled of pine smoke and home, the space between them, a chasm of 5 years, suddenly felt imposing, a void that demanded to be closed. She took a half step, a small, uncertain movement that was both a question and a surrender. Elias Boone, a man who had not known softness in half a decade, responded. He didn't lunge, he didn't grab. He met her. He took a single, slow step, closing the final, respectful distance between them. They stood in the stable doorway, so close that the cold night air could not pass between them. He could feel the fragile warmth of her body, smell the faint, clean scent of the lye soap he'd washed her face with, mixed with the peppermint tea Maeve had given her. The plan, the train, the danger, it all faded, leaving only this small, impossible circle of light. They were too broken for grand declarations. They spoke of the only thing that mattered more than what they had lost. "Hazel," he whispered, his voice thick and breaking. She's so brave, but she's terrified of the big red hen, the one she calls General. She marches out to the coop every morning like she's going to war, her fists balled up. A sound, like a broken bird, escaped Rosalie's throat. It was a watery, choked laugh, a true memory. Sharp and clear. She always hated feathers. She said they were untidy. The small, shared memory broke something in both of them. "Wren," Rosalie whispered back, her own hand coming up, her fingers tentatively touching the rough canvas of his duster. "The quiet one. When she would fall asleep in the sun. Did her hair. Does it still smell like warm dust and honey?" Elias's throat closed. He couldn't speak. He just nodded, his eyes burning. That was all it took. The past and the present slammed together. He looked from her searching, tear-filled eyes to her mouth, the mouth he had seen in his nightmares. Silent and gray, the mouth that was here, alive, trembling. His arms, which had held nothing but tools and grief, went around her. His hand splayed wide across her back, pulling her against his chest. He held her with a desperate, crushing force, as if he could physically push her back into his life, as if Draeger's men were right behind him, trying to pull her away. She did not resist. She melted against him, her own arms circling his neck, her hands clinging to his shoulders, then tangling in his thick, damp hair. It was a homecoming. He buried his face in her shorn hair, in the crook of her neck, breathing her in. "Rosalie," he choked out, the name a prayer. She pulled back just enough to look at him. His face was a mask of pain and love. They both leaned in at the same time, their foreheads touched first. A moment of pure, silent contact. They stopped there, just breathing, their eyes closed. His breath was the cold night air. Hers was the faint, sweet trace of peppermint. Their breaths mingled, a shared, living thing. Then his lips found hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was the kiss of a man starved, of a man drowning who had just found air. It was long and warm and desperate, a kiss that sought to erase 5 years of cold and silence. It was hesitant for only a second before it deepened, becoming a fierce, claiming act. It was not a kiss of seduction. It was a kiss of existence. It said, "You are real. I am real. We are real." His hand on her back moved, tracing the sharp line of her spine, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved. Her hand slid from his hair, down his neck, cupping his jaw. Her fingers traced the unfamiliar, rough stubble, the hard-set line of the man he had become, the stranger who was her husband. They both trembled. It was not the cold. It was the violent, surging shock of reconnection. It was 5 years of pent-up grief, loneliness, and rage, all melting into a single, overwhelming wave of relief. The kiss was a vow, a promise of retribution, and a desperate plea for a future. It lingered, a deep, warm, profound pressing of mouths, a silent sharing of breath and life. Slowly, agonizingly, they broke apart. They did not let go. They remained in the embrace, foreheads resting against each other, both of them breathing hard, as if they had run a mile. Rosalie, her eyes still closed, her lips still tingling from the contact, lifted one trembling hand from his shoulder. She pressed 2 fingers to her own chest, over her heart. She moved them to her temple, to the scar. Then her eyes opened, and she pointed those 2 fingers directly at Elias. "In my heart, in my mind, you." A slow, unsteady smile, the first true smile in half a decade, broke across Elias Boone's face. It was a painful, beautiful thing. He whispered, his voice thick with the promise. "Tomorrow, tomorrow, we take back our names." He sealed the vow with a final, gentle kiss to her forehead. He kept his arm locked around her waist, turning her to face the darkness with him. They stood together, a single, solid shape in the stable doorway, watching the dark ridge where the depot sat. Far out in that darkness, beyond the small circle of their light, a man lay prone on a wet hillside. He was soaked, cold, and patient. He'd been one of the Hemlock guards, the one who had been at the stables, not the front desk. He had tracked Maeve's wagon. He watched the stable through a small spyglass. He saw the sheriff. He saw the woman. He saw the man embrace her. He lowered the glass, took a drag from a hand-rolled cigarette, cupping the end so the cherry was invisible. He had his orders. Draeger had been clear. The woman was not to be harmed. But the man, Boone, was another story. And the sheriff, she was a complication. He settled in, his rifle oiled and ready. The midnight train was still 2 hours away. The world narrowed to the shriek of a whistle and the rhythmic, pounding drum of the engine. It was midnight. The Devil's Trestle loomed out of the darkness, a skeletal spiderweb of iron and timber spanning a canyon 1,000 feet deep. Miles up the track, Maeve Alcott, her broken arm in a tight sling, had done her work. Using her one good hand, She had climbed a signal gantry and shattered the green all-clear lens, replacing it with a fixed red. The mail train, which had been hurtling through the ravine, was forced to bleed its speed. The engineer, cursing the delay, slowed the massive engine to a crawl, its pistons hissing in frustration as it approached the dark water station just before the trestle itself. This was the window. As the train slowed, its speed matching a running man, Elias and Rosalie emerged from the shadows of a rock cutting. "I'll go first," Elias said. He grabbed the iron rungs of a boxcar, swung himself up, and crawled onto the roof. He moved like a panther, low and fast, toward the mail car. Rosalie, fueled by an icy, focused rage, waited for the mail car itself. She grabbed the handle, planted her foot, and swung aboard. Vanishing into the narrow corridor, she found the storage room easily. It was lit by a single, swaying lantern, and there, as she had remembered, was Otto Vale. He was at a small desk, a bottle of whiskey beside him, stamping manifests. He looked up, his eyes widening in confusion as this thin, pale woman with shorn hair and burning eyes stepped into his car. "Who are you?" he snapped, his hand moving to a pistol on the desk. "This is a federal car." I was told to find my husband," Rosalie said, her voice trembling just enough. "He works for the line. A German man, from Hamburg." Otto relaxed, but only slightly. "There's no passengers allowed. He said to meet him," Rosalie pressed, her eyes filling with convincing tears. He said he missed the songs from home." Otto's face softened, the whiskey and the hour working on him. "Home," he said, his voice thick. "Germany. It is a hard thing to be so far from home." This was the signal. Outside, clinging to the side of the car, Elias heard the word. He pulled the harmonica from his pocket. He brought it to his lips, and with the wind whistling past his ears, he played the first few notes of the Copper Creek Waltz, sharp and clear in the night air, cut through the rumble of the train. Inside the car, Otto Vale froze. His head snapped up. He looked at Rosalie, his eyes suddenly wet. "That tune, my mother, I know," Rosalie whispered, stepping closer. "It makes me sad, too." He was lost. His sentimental, drunken soul was transported back 30 years. He turned from his desk, walking to the small, barred window, trying to see the impossible musician. "It is beautiful," he choked out. Rosalie moved. Her eyes darted to the desk. 2 identical iron document chests sat side by side. One was heavily bolted. The other, a perfect copy, was the fake Maeve had provided from her own wagon. On Otto's desk, next to the pistol, was a heavy ring of keys. Rosalie did not swap the chests. She swapped the keys. In one fluid, silent motion, she lifted the heavy ring from the desk and replaced it with a duplicate ring Elias had, which held only the key to the fake chest. She dropped the real ring into her own pocket. Otto, his back still to her, was lost in the music, wiping his eyes. "Thank you, mister." He sniffled at the window. "Thank you." At that moment, a heavy boot slammed onto the roof of the car. Elias flattened himself, pulling his gun. The man from the ridge, the smoker, the one in the black hat, landed 2 feet from him. "Drager sends his regards. Boone!" The man roared over the engine's hiss. He lunged, not with a gun, but with a heavy, weighted club. Elias rolled, the club smashing the wooden roof where he'd been. He had no room to shoot, no time. The man was on him, a whirlwind of fists. They struggled on the narrow, swaying roof, the canyon abyss a black mouth waiting on either side. The man raised the club for a final blow. Elias didn't fire. He dropped his pistol and grabbed the lariat from his belt. In a single, desperate, upward flip, he snapped the loop. It wasn't a perfect throw, but it was enough. The loop caught the man's wrist and the club. Elias yanked hard. The man, caught off balance, was pulled forward. Elias used his own vaquero training, bracing his foot, dropping his weight. The man flipped over Elias's hip. His gun hand tangled in the rope. He didn't fall from the train. Elias pinned him, hog-tying his arms and legs in seconds, the man cursing, helpless. Elias left him trussed on the roof. Just as he finished, the train's brakes shrieked, a sound of tearing metal. The slow crawl became a dead stop. At the water station, Sheriff Lita McRae sat on her horse, directly on the tracks, her hand raised. Behind her, a dozen men ranchers, miners, and two bewildered-looking reporters from the Tucson Daily Star Lita had dragged from the saloon watched, their torches and lanterns illuminating the scene. "This is a federal stop," the engineer yelled from his cab. "I'm a federal officer, son," Lita boomed, her badge glinting. "And I have a territorial warrant to search this train for stolen property. Open this car." She was pointing at the mail car. The door slid open. Elias Boone dropped to the ground. Then he turned and lifted his wife, Rosalie, down. She was holding a single, heavy, iron document chest. "This is it," Elias said, his voice carrying in the sudden, tense silence. "That's railroad property," a new voice shouted, thin and furious. Silas Drager, wearing a silk dressing gown and a look of cold fury, stepped down from the luxurious private car at the back of the train. He was flanked by 2 lawyers and 4 men with shotguns. "Sheriff," Drager said, his voice oily, "you are interfering with commerce. I will have your badge for this. That box is mine. Otto, take it back." Otto Vale, his face a mask of pale, drunken confusion, fumbled at his belt. He pulled out the key ring Rosalie had given him. He tried to unlock the other chest, the fake one still in the car. The key wouldn't turn. It's stuck, sir," he stammered. "It's not stuck," Rosalie said, her voice clear and strong. She held up the real ring of keys. "He has the wrong set." She unlocked the chest she was holding. Elias lifted the lid. It was packed with ledgers. "Lita," Elias said. Lita McRae dismounted. She pulled the top ledger from the box and held it up to the lantern light. The reporters scribbled furiously. "Read it, Sheriff," a miner shouted. Lita ran her finger down a page. Her voice was cold and clear, echoing in the canyon. Account entry. October 1884. To the Copper Creek Clinic for indefinite care of Jane Doe patient. $500. Entry. She flipped a page. March 1885 to anonymous filer. Marrow Pass Land Office. Ree Boone. Desertion claim. $100. The crowd gasped. Entry payroll. Drager Security. Cole Harden. $1,000. Bonus. Boone Containment. Entry, she read, her voice rising. Patient RQ. Hemlock Sanitarium. Memo, keep out of sight until deed transfer is final. A low growl rose from the crowd. The miners and ranchers surged forward. The reporters were writing so fast their pencils threatened to snap. Drager's face was no longer cold. It was purple with rage. He was ruined. The truth was out. "Fools!" he shrieked. "If I can't have it, no one can." He turned to his gunmen. "The trestle, you have the charges, blow it all to hell now." His men ran, not at the crowd, but past the train, onto the trestle itself, carrying canvas bags. They were planting dynamite. "He's destroying the evidence," Lita roared. She drew her pistol. "Boone, with me." Elias and Lita ran onto the bridge. Elias didn't draw his gun. He tackled one gunman, sending him and his bag of explosives careening into the iron supports. Lita fired, her shot skipping off the tracks, forcing the other 2 to drop their fuses and take cover. At the same moment, one of the lawyers, in a panic, ran to the engine, shoved the engineer aside, and pulled the brake lever, releasing it. The train, its engine still hissing, began to roll forward, onto the bridge. "The train!" Maeve screamed from the sidelines. Rosalie, standing by the mail car, saw it. The train was rolling, unmanned, onto a bridge rigged to explode. The car with the rest of the ledgers. The people. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled up the side of the engine cab. She found the brake wheel and, with a strength born of 5 years of stolen life, she grabbed it, bracing her feet, and threw her entire weight into it. The iron wheel groaned. The brakes shrieked, sending up a shower of sparks that lit the canyon. The train shuddered, slowed, and stopped. Its front wheels just feet from where Elias and Lita were fighting. The battle was over. Drager's men were disarmed. Elias held the last one by the collar, the man's fuse-lighting hand broken. Silas Drager stood alone, his silk robe flapping in the wind, his face a mask of utter defeat. The crowd, the press, and the sheriff were all watching him. Rosalie Boone, thin, scarred, but unbroken, stood in the engine cab, her hand on the brake, having saved them all. The Marrow Pass District Courthouse was not a grand hall of justice. It was a single-story adobe box, smelling of dry plaster, old sweat, and the bitter, metallic tang of desperation. On this day, it was packed. Every bench was full. Miners, ranchers, saloon girls, and newspapermen crammed the aisles, standing shoulder to shoulder, turning the room into a sweltering, airless pit. At the front, Judge Ephraim Cutter sat elevated, his face a map of sun-scorched wrinkles, his eyes holding the weary, impartial gravity of a man who had seen every sin the territory had to offer. At one table sat Silas Drager. He was no longer the panicked man in a silk robe. He was composed, flanked by two expensive lawyers from Tucson who looked upon the dusty courtroom with open contempt. At the other table sat Elias Boone, his posture rigid, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Beside him, Rosalie sat, pale but straight-backed, her eyes fixed on the judge. Lita McCrae stood against the back wall, her hand never far from her sidearm, her presence a silent promise. "Mr. Pike," Judge Cutter said, his voice like rocks grinding together, "you demanded this special session on the grounds of new and exigent evidence. The 72-hour stay I granted expires at noon. You have the floor." Jonah Pike stood. His suit was rumpled, his spectacles smudged. He looked young, outgunned. He took a deep, shaky breath, and then he began. "Your Honor, we are here today because of a lie 5 years old, born of greed and cruelty. We will prove that Silas Drager," he pointed, his hand shaking but his voice clear, "did knowingly and with malice aforethought conspire to defraud my client, Elias Boone, of his land, his livelihood, and his life. And he did it by kidnapping and falsely imprisoning Mr. Boone's wife, Rosalie Boone, whom this court and Mr. Drager had declared dead." A violent murmur swept the room. Drager's lawyers shouted, "Objection, outrageous slander. It is only slander if it is untrue. Counselor," Judge Cutter rumbled, "proceed, Mr. Pike, and bring your proof." "My proof," Pike said, "is in this box." Two deputies hauled the heavy iron document chest onto the evidence table. "This is Silas Drager's private ledger, taken from his personal mail car. I would like to read into the record." For 20 minutes, Pike read. He read the entry for the Copper Creek Clinic, paying for the indefinite care of Jane Doe. He read the entry for the $100 bribe to the anonymous filer at the land office, referencing the Boone desertion claim. He read the payroll for the Drager security force, including the line item Boone containment. And he read the final, damning entry from the Hemlock Sanitarium. Patient RQ. Keep out of sight until deed transfer is final. The room was silent, horrified. "I call Nurse Maeve Alcott to the stand." Maeve, her arm in a fresh sling, was sworn in. She spoke with clinical, unshakable clarity. She described the Jane Doe patient, the amnesia, the burns, the transfer to Hemlock, the drugged, hopeless state of the patients. "And now," Pike said, his voice softening, "the defense calls Rosalie Boone." A collective gasp. Rosalie stood. She walked to the stand, her steps measured, her head high. When she took the oath, her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Mrs. Boone," Pike said gently, "please, tell the court what you remember of the Agnes May fire." Rosalie closed her eyes. The courtroom faded. "The whistle," she whispered. It wouldn't stop. The deck was hot. The paint was burning. The smell. Smoke." Her hand went to her temple. to the scar. I fell, then the water. It was so cold. I thought I was dead. I couldn't breathe. What happened then? A hand, she said, her voice stronger. A strong hand. It pulled me from the water into a small boat. A rowboat. Did you see who it was? Was it your husband? No, she said. My eyes. The smoke. I couldn't see. But I remember him, the man. He wrapped me in a dry blanket. Did he speak to you? He said, "You are safe now. Your old life is gone, burned away." He said he would take care of me. He said my name was Jane. And you said you remember him. Pike pressed. How if you could not see? Rosalie's eyes opened. They were burning. The smell, she said. He smelled rich, like spices, like musk. An expensive, heavy smell. I never forgot that smell. It was the smell of the man who told me I was dead. She was done. She walked back to her seat, her body trembling, and Elias's hand found hers under the table, his grip a vise of iron. Drager's lawyer, a slick man named Barrows, leaped to his feet. Your Honor, this is a performance. A pathetic, tragic fantasy. What Mr. Pike calls a conspiracy. We call charity my client, Silas Drager, is a known benefactor, a pillar of this territory. He found a woman, the lone survivor of a terrible tragedy, addled and broken. And what did he do? He saved her. He paid for her medical care, for years. From his own pocket, Drager himself leaned forward, his voice oozing concern. I was a benefactor. Your Honor, I saved her life, and this is how I am repaid by having my property stolen by a bankrupt rancher and a hysterical woman. A benefactor, Pike repeated, tasting the word. He held up a single sheet of paper. Your Honor, I would like to recall Nurse Maeve Alcott for one final question. Maeve returned. Nurse Alcott, Pike said, you are familiar with medicines, poultices, and scents, are you not? I am. Are you familiar with a scent described as a heavy, expensive musk? I am, Maeve said, her eyes on Drager. At Hemlock, Dr. Finch, the man who ran the facility for Mr. and Drager, kept a small crystal bottle of it in his office. He said it was Mr. Drager's personal scent. He would use it. When the patient, Jane, was agitated, he said it calmed her. And did this scent have a name? It did. He was very proud of it. He called it Balkan musk. He said it was the rarest in the world. Drager's face went white. Balkan musk, Pike repeated. He held up the paper. Your Honor, I present this the final page from the ledger's expense accounts. An invoice from the Tucson Import House, dated November 2nd, 1884, 2 days after the Agnes May disaster, for one case Balkan musk, Thuong Hang, billed directly to the private accounts of Silas Drager. He threw the paper onto the table. It was over. And why? Pike roared, striding to a large map of the county he had pinned to the wall. Why this 5-year, monstrous, cruel deception? For this, his finger stabbed the map. The proposed route for the Devil's Trestle Spur. And here, Sagebrush Cross. And here, gentlemen, the only reliable spring, the only water source for 50 miles, the only place to build the water tower that makes his entire railroad possible. Pike turned to the jury box, though there was no jury, and then to the crowd. He couldn't buy the land, so he stole the man's wife, buried her alive, and waited. He waited for the law to give him what his greed demanded. Judge Cutter held up one hand. The room was deathly quiet. He did not look at Pike, or Drager. He looked at the law books on his desk. He closed the one he was reading. He slammed his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. This court, he said, his voice resonating with cold fury, finds that the desertion claim filed in 1885 against the property known as Sagebrush Cross was filed fraudulently, in bad faith, and as part of a criminal conspiracy. That claim is hereby struck from the record. The deed, whole and complete, is affirmed to its rightful owner, Elias Boone. Elias grabbed Rosalie's hand, his shoulders slumping in relief. Furthermore, Judge Cutter continued, his eyes finally landing on Draeger, this court finds sufficient evidence to issue a territorial warrant for the immediate arrest of Silas Draeger on the charges of kidnapping, conspiracy to commit land fraud, and attempted murder. Bailiffs, seize that man. Chaos. The two town deputies moved, but Draeger's Tucson lawyers were faster. They leaped up, shouting, "Appeal, we will appeal. You have no jurisdiction." It was the only distraction Draeger needed. He was not a fighter. He was a rat. He shoved his own lawyer aside and bolted, not for the main entrance, but for the judge's private chambers in the back. "He's running," Lita McRae roared, drawing her gun and shoving through the crowd. Elias, Rosalie, and Pike were swept up in the tide, emerging onto the sun-blasted courthouse steps just as the crowd began to pour out. They were blinded by the light, deafened by the shouts. "Nobody move!" The shout was raw, desperate. It cut through the noise. Elias turned. His blood froze. Standing near the base of the steps, pressed against the adobe wall, was Cole Hardin, the man in the black hat, the ambusher. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, somehow escaped from Lita's jail. He had his arm locked around Jonah Pike's neck. In his other hand, a long, gleaming Bowie knife was pressed hard against the young lawyer's throat. "The box!" Hardin screamed, his eyes wild, darting from Lita's drawn gun to Elias. "Give me the box, Boone, the ledgers, or I'll cut his throat right here." Lita raised her pistol, her face a mask of stone. "Let him go. Hardin, it's over. Draeger's gone. You've got nowhere left to run." "I'll run through him," he shrieked, pulling Pike tighter. Pike gasped, a thin line of red appearing on his neck. "The box now!" Rosalie cried out, her hand flying to her mouth. Elias looked at the scene. Hardin was a cornered wolf, desperate, stupid, deadly. He looked at Lita, her gun steady, but she had no clean shot. Slowly, deliberately, Elias unbuckled his gun belt. "Elias, no," Rosalie whispered. He didn't listen. He let the heavy belt, his pistol, his identity for 5 years, fall to the dust of the street with a heavy, final thud. He raised his hands, open and empty. He walked forward. "Stay back. Boone, I'll do it." Elias stopped. He was 10 feet away. He used the voice he saved for a horse with a broken leg, low, calm, steady. "You don't want the box. Hardin, it's just paper. You want a life. Shut up, Draeger will pay me for that box." "Draeger's gone," Elias said, never blinking. "He's halfway to Mexico by now. He left you. He left you here to hang for all of it. For the kidnapping. For the ambushes. For this." Hardin's arm trembled. The knife wavered. He pays me." "He's done paying," Elias said. "Look around you, son. It's over. You're the last man standing in a fight that's already lost." "I'm offering you a trade. A better one." "What? What trade?" "Your testimony. For your life. You let the lawyer go, you drop the knife. You walk back into that courtroom and you tell Judge Cutter everything. Everything Draeger paid you for. From the beginning." Elias glanced at Lita. "The sheriff can get you a deal. You turn witness for the territory. You'll do time, but you'll walk out of it. It's a damn sight better than a rope, and a rope is all that's waiting for you." Hardin looked at the angry crowd. He looked at Lita's steady gun. He looked at Elias, unarmed, offering him the only hand that wasn't holding a weapon. He was trapped. The rage and desperation in his face cracked, leaving only a hollow, bitter emptiness. With a sudden sob, he shoved Jonah Pike away. The lawyer fell to his knees, gasping. The Bowie knife clattered to the ground. Cole Hardin raised his empty, shaking hands above his head. He looked at Elias, his face a mask of ugly, broken truth. He was never going to stop," he whispered, the confession tearing out of him. "It was all for his money. It was all just for his damn money." Lita McRae holstered her pistol and nodded to her deputies. "Get him inside. Put him in irons. The judge is going to want to hear this." The dust of the road back to Sagebrush Cross was different. It was the same alkali grit, the same pale powder, but it no longer felt like the dust of an ending. It was the dust of home. The buckboard, borrowed from a grateful Jonah Pike, rattled over the final ridge as the sun touched the western horizon, spilling a light like liquid gold across the vast, silent land. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the first stars were pricking through. Elias sat on the wagon bench, the reins loose in his hands. Beside him, Rosalie sat straight, her hands clutching the iron document chest on her lap. She was not the spectral Jane of Hemlock, nor the terrified refugee from the stable. Dressed in a new cotton dress Maeve had sourced, her shorn hair brushed, her face washed clean, she looked like a pilgrim who had just sighted land. As they passed the warped gate, Elias had fixed what felt like a lifetime ago. He saw them. The small cabin door was open, spilling warm lamplight onto the porch. Two small figures, silhouetted against it, were peering into the dusk. The sound of the wagon wheels was all it took. "He's here," Hazel's voice, high and clear, pierced the twilight. They bolted from the porch, two tiny figures in nightshirts, their bare feet flying over the packed earth they had crossed in terror only days before. They ran, not just with the speed of children, but with the desperate, heartbreaking hope of them. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop. He did not get to move. Rosalie was already down, vaulting over the side before the wheels had stopped turning. She stumbled, caught her balance, and ran to meet them. "Mama!" The word was a dual cry, a perfect, piercing harmony. Rosalie did not stop. She fell to her knees in the dirt, her arms open. "My babies!" she choked out. The girl slammed into her. Hazel, the brave one, wrapped her arms around Rosalie's neck with a force that was almost violent. Wren, the quiet one, buried her face in Rosalie's dress, her small body shuddering with sobs she had held back for a lifetime. Rosalie clutched them, her own body shaking. Her hands, scraped raw from the crawl space, moved desperately over them, learning them again. She kissed Hazel's tangled hair, Wren's small neck, her own tears soaking their nightshirts. It was not a gentle hug. It was the hug of a woman reclaiming her own limbs, her own heart. It was a trembling, frantic, and yet unshakably solid embrace. She was a ghost no more. She was an anchor. Elias sat on the wagon, watching. He did not move. He let the moment be theirs. His own heart felt too large for his chest, a painful, swelling thing. After a long moment, Rosalie looked up, her tear-streaked face finding his in the dusk. She did not need to say a word. Her eyes said it all. "We are home." He stepped down from the wagon, his movement stiff. He walked to the porch, where he had left his tools. He picked up a hammer and one last nail. Above the door, hanging from two new hooks, was a plank of smooth, sanded pine. He had carved it the night before the trial, a desperate act of faith. In clear, deep letters, it read, "Hazel. Wren Rosalie, welcome home." He placed the final nail in the corner and struck it. The sound was not the thud of work, but the final, declarative strike of a gavel. Done. Final. True. The kitchen was a different place. The air, which had been thick with the ghosts of solitude, was now warm. It smelled of cinnamon, baked apples, and coffee. Rosalie, having washed the children's faces and tucked them into the bed that had been hers, was now standing at the dry sink, peeling potatoes for a late supper. Elias stood beside her, at the stove, stirring a pan of beans. They worked in a silence that was not empty, but full. It was the comfortable, practiced silence of a life resuming its old rhythms, a life that no longer needed to fill every moment with words. Elias set the spoon down and reached for the salt crock, his arm brushing her shoulder. It was the lightest touch, a bare whisper of wool against cotton, but it was everything. It was an apology. It was a promise. It was a statement of fact. "I am here. You are here." Rosalie's hands paused in their work. She leaned into the touch for just a fraction of a second, a movement so small he might have imagined it. A slow, tentative smile touched her lips. He returned it, his own smile feeling rusty, unfamiliar, but real. 1,000 words of pain, of forgiveness, of a future, all passed between them in that single, silent touch. Later, the dishes were done, the children asleep. The wind had picked up, a cool, dry breeze that carried the scent of the high desert, of sage and distant pine. They sat on the porch steps, side by side. Elias leaned against the post he had mended. Rosalie sat close, the wool blanket from his saddle roll wrapped around her shoulders. The stars were a riot, a spray of diamonds against black velvet. Elias pulled the harmonica from his pocket. He tapped it against his palm, his eyes on the dark horizon. He brought it to his lips. He played. The Copper Creek Waltz drifted into the night. It was not the desperate, lonely call from the ridge in Montana. It was not the frantic, sharp melody of the train heist. It was slow. It was gentle. It was a love song. The notes rose and fell, a melody of a thing that was not lost, but found. Rosalie listened, her head tilted. When the last note faded, she let out a long, slow breath, a breath she felt she had been holding for 5 years. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It was a simple act. The trust it implied was monumental. He stopped breathing for a second, feeling the warm, light weight of her. He covered his own fear, the fear that this was a dream, that she would vanish with the daylight, and he accepted the gift. Slowly, he lifted his hand and found hers. Her fingers were small and cool, and they laced with his, calloused and rough. He held her hand, not with the desperate grip of the escape, but with the gentle, firm hold of a man who was never letting go. He raised her knuckles to his lips and pressed a kiss there, his rough stubble scratching her skin. A small sound came from the doorway. Hazel and Wren stood there, rubbing their eyes, shadows in their nightshirts. "We heard the music," Hazel whispered. "Come here," Elias said, his voice soft. The girls came, climbing into their laps. Wren burrowed against Rosalie's chest, and Hazel settled against Elias. They sat, a family, under the Arizona stars. Wren, her face half hidden, lifted a sleepy hand. She touched her chest. She touched her forehead. She pointed at Rosalie. Then she pointed at Elias. Hazel, seeing her, did the same. Heart, head, pointing. Rosalie's breath hitched. She looked at Elias, her eyes shining in the starlight. She brought her own hand up, her movements no longer hesitant, but sure. She touched her heart, her temple, and she pointed at him. Elias Boone smiled. He completed the circle, his own large, rough hand touching his chest, his head, and then pointing, his finger encompassing all 3 of them. Their shared laughter was a soft, warm sound, like the flicker of a campfire in the vast, quiet dark. A single horseman approached, his arrival announced by the soft jingle of a bridle. Sheriff Lita McCrae reined in, her face tired in the moonlight. "Boone, Mrs. Boone," she nodded. She did not dismount. "Sheriff," Elias said, rising, "just wanted to close the book." Lita said, "The wires from Tucson just came in. Drager was caught at the border. Hardin's testimony, on top of the ledgers, was a clean nail in his coffin. The railroad board has already disavowed him. He'll be tried by a federal judge. He'll never see daylight again." A chapter, dark and brutal, was finally closed. "We owe you everything, Lita," Rosalie said, her voice clear from the steps. Lita McCrae looked at the family, at the sign, at the quiet ranch. "No, ma'am," she said. "You just owed yourselves the truth. You sleep well. You've earned it." She turned her horse and rode away. A solitary, just figure disappearing into the sagebrush. Later, Elias tucked the girls back into their bed. Hazel was already half asleep, but Wren's eyes were open, watching him. "Is the story over?" she whispered. Elias sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her hair. "No," he said, his voice low. "This isn't a story about losing. It's a story about finding. It's a story about a mama who was so brave. She crossed a desert, and so smart. She remembered her way home, even when her mind was lost. It's a story about a fire, but about how the fire didn't win. He kissed her forehead. Now sleep. He joined Rosalie on the porch. She was standing by the door, looking up at the new sign, her fingers tracing the carved letters of her own name. She turned to him as he approached. The wind was cool, and it stirred her shorn hair. "Elias," she said, her voice quiet. "I have to tell you, the 5 years, they're like a fog, like a gray, cold room. I don't know if I'll ever remember everything from yesterday. I don't know if I'll ever be the woman you lost." He stepped close to her, standing in the doorway, blocking the wind. He looked at her, at the scar that was part of her, at the eyes that were finally, truly, hers again. "Maybe you won't," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could barely name. "But I don't need the woman I lost." He reached into his pocket and took out the small, brass medallion, the one Hazel had worn, the one he had made. He undid the thong. "I choose the woman who found me." She looked at him, confused by his words. He didn't speak again. He simply lifted the leather thong and placed it around her neck. He settled the medallion, the cypress tree, over her heart. It rested against her skin, a familiar, cool weight. "Home," Elias Boone whispered, his hand resting over the medallion, over her heart, "is not about remembering yesterday. Home is where you touch, and you find the smell of wood smoke." She closed her eyes, her hand covering his. She was home. The camera pulled back, leaving the two of them standing in the doorway, a solid, unbreakable silhouette against the warm light of the cabin. It rose, up over the small ranch, up over the vast, dark territory, until it was lost in the field of endless stars. The last, fading notes of the Copper Creek Waltz were carried away on the high desert wind. Love rides again under open skies. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment to connect with us and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.